tenured jurist. And that's the angle. Joining me now for reaction are three esteemed attorneys in San Francisco: Harmeet Dhillon, RNC National Committee woman; in Orlando, Scott Bolden, a Democratic strategist; and with me here in Washington, Saul Weisenberg, cute and cuddly as always, who is the Deputy Independent Counsel in the Bill Clinton investigation. Yeah, Scott, you're not here. Harmeet's here. You leave me with grouchy Saul. I'm just teasing. I love Saul.
I'm missing Saul.
Oh, no. Good to see all of you. Let's start with you, Harmeet. When we see an entire federal program either struck down or, in this case, a decision invalidated in 90 days, if the judge isn't satisfied, it'll be invalidated. That's a lot of power for one unelected district court judge residing in Washington, D.C.
That's right, Laura, but he isn't the first one. He's the third in the country. As you mentioned in your opening, Judge Alsup in San Francisco did it, and then a judge in Brooklyn. But what's interesting to note for your viewers is that there was a federal judge in Maryland who ruled the opposite way. And so what's wrong with this whole scheme is that one district judge is now overruling basically another district judge, and this scheme of nationwide injunctions is inviting litigants to forum shop. And so, of course, they're all running to the three most liberal jurisdictions in America: Northern District of California, Eastern District of New York, and District of Columbia. And, you know, that is not how our courts were meant to be. Our courts were meant to have a hierarchy, as you mentioned, and only a superior court, not an equivalent court, should be allowed to do this. And President Trump has been subject to 22 nationwide injunctions. That's more than any other president in history.
So that's a district court judge, right, Harmeet? A district court judge.
A district court judge
sitting in a courthouse, an injunction that affects the whole country. That's just wild. That's just wild.
And this didn't used to be a thing. It didn't used to be a thing. For 175 years of our country's history, there were no nationwide injunctions. This is a recent fashion, and it's out of control, Laura.
Scott, let's go to you. Robert Bork talked about the political seduction of the law. And he had given lots of speeches over the years about, and he disagreed with Justice Scalia on this, about limiting the federal court's jurisdiction because of the allure, the political allure that a lot of these judges end up getting tangled up with. Both they can on the left and the right. So his view is, sadly, you can't trust a lot of these judges to just apply the law faithfully and the Constitution faithfully. They end up legislating from the bench. Your take?
My take is, I don't know what you all are talking about. There are three branches of government. There's no federal district judge that overrules another federal district judge. The checks and balances of the Constitution, which, Laura, in your angle, you want to just change because you disagree with the positions taken by these judges.
Thank you very much.
You want to change it. But here's the checks and balances. The DOJ and anyone else who loses at the federal district court level, here's the thing. They can go to the Court of Appeals or the Ninth Circuit or whatever circuit. They can even go to the Supreme Court. So you don't have to stay at the federal district court level. And this idea that somehow issues of national importance or import have to go to more qualified judges. Tell me what Court of Appeals judge is more qualified than a federal district court judge.
A district court judge spends most of his time or her time figuring out, the sentencing guidelines and how they apply. I clerked on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. These are like sentencing guidelines cases, ERISA cases. I want to go to you, Saul. I know you like Bates.
And you know where the majority of the Court of Appeals cases come from? Those judges come from the federal district court.
Yeah, we get that. But in the Constitution, the Congress could do away with all these courts if they wanted to. Saul, you like Bates. You know him because he worked for Ken Starr. In this case, though, he goes beyond the Brooklyn judge or the Ninth Circuit District Court judge in California by saying not only must you restore the current DACA, but you must start taking new applications.
In actuality, it is a very narrow opinion. What Judge Bates did, and by the way, Judge Bates is not your normal district court judge. He was appointed to the FISA court by John Roberts. He's respected throughout the judiciary. Doesn't mean his opinion is correct, but he's not one of these wacky California judges like Alsup, who clerked for William O. Douglas. And what he actually said was very narrow. He said, this, under the Administrative Procedures Act, the government did not adequately explain why they think that Obama lacked the Constitution.
Here's the explanation. Obama was acting as a legislator. That's basically what Sessions said in his letter. Obama was acting as a super legislator because his Democrats couldn't do amnesty. So Obama, contrary to what his own Justice Department told him to do, He decided, I'm just going to do this by executive fiat.
Judge
He created
Bates,
de facto amnesty for 700,000.
And all Judge Bates
that
said,
was an outrage.
All Judge Bates said was, you got 90 days to come up with a better reason.
Judge Bates wasn't just saying that. He also talked about the people relying on DACA and that the
well, that's because that's part of the law. That's part of the law. You can't come in. You can't.
It's all made up.
No, it isn't. You can't.
You may not like it, but
no, it
the
isn't.
law.
It's the D.C. Circuit law. He's got to follow the D.C. Circuit.
No,
Exactly.
he made it up. Do you think you Saul Weisenberg do not think we have a problem with runaway judges in this country? They're
Absolutely.
just making a law on the bench.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying I agree with Judge Bates' decision, but it is a mainstream decision. And all he said was, if he wanted to be like one of these California judges,
he's worse than the California
he would have
judges
said
on
he
this.
would have said, I vacate it right away. He says, you've got 90 days.
Yeah.
You were sloppy, is what he said. You've got 90 days to give me a better
He
reason.
issued a permanent injunction.
Hold on, Harmeet.
But
Harmeet
Laura,
and then Scott.
Laura.
Well, Harmeet didn't have a problem with a
Laura,
permanent nationwide injunction when it was a conservative judge in Texas invalidating
Exactly.
DACA.
Well,
Okay.
that was,
I don't
okay, go
think
ahead,
it should.
Harmeet.
Scott, you raise a good point. I think that the Democrats should be very concerned about this as well, because the tables will be turned one day, and it is not the place of judges who are an equal branch, not a superior branch, to be issuing nationwide injunctions on the basis of 2 or 3 people in front of them. That's outrageous, and it's not precedented in our history. But this judge did go further, Laura, than the judge in California. He issued some partial summary judgment here with no trial.
Partial.
He just sort of made up some of these rulings that make no sense. And finally, one important point is that President Obama himself in 2012, when he signed the DACA order, he said this is a temporary measure. This is a stopgap. This is to give hope to some people until Congress acts.
Right.
It isn't now it's being converted into a permanent
law,
entitlement.
permanent fixture. All right, guys, we got to get into
permanent.
Comey made a comment. I want to play this for all of you. Scott, you can react. This is what he said tonight on CNN. Let's watch.
After I was fired, I put together a legal team of 3 people, one of whom was Professor Dan Richman at Columbia University. After I had asked him to give this information to the media, I separately gave my legal team 4 memos, which were unclassified. They included the one that he had gotten to give the substance of it to the New York Times. The bottom line is, I see no credible claim by any serious person that violated the law.
Scott, no problem. A couple of the memos were confidential. 4 of them were not.
Absolutely. And because they were not confidential or seen as secret and what have you, no problem. And I guarantee you this, under the Trump administration, if they really thought that he had leaked secret documents or classified documents, he'd be prosecuted right now. What's the delay? You've yelled and screamed about this for months about him leaking. But what about the substance of those documents, which is the real issue? And why hasn't he been prosecuted if he's broken the law with the Republican administration that he's at war with right now?
Saul.
Why not?
Saul.
Well, as a practical matter, it doesn't matter because he's judgment-proof in D.C. There's no D.C. jury, even if he was ever prosecuted, that would ever convict Jim Comey. They're not going to convict anybody who's an enemy of Trump. So
because
they're
he's done
looking at
nothing
it.
wrong, Saul.
Oh, yeah, he did nothing
He's
wrong.
done
he's
nothing
done it.
wrong.
No, he's done. He's
The
done. Look,
regulation for DOJ says you can't traffic, trade, or
then
transfer government
prosecute
property,
him
even if
then.
it's not.
Why hasn't he
this
been
is-
prosecuted?
It's government
Why
property.
hasn't he been prosecuted?
It's government property. He had no business giving.
Why
it
wasn't
to his-
Hillary prosecuted? What do you mean?
It's government
There's a lot of
property,
reasons.
whether it's classified
Because
or
it's
not. He had no
prosecutorial
business,
discretion.
no business whatsoever
Right.
turning it over to his buddy. He's done a lot of things wrong that aren't necessarily criminal. He's really acted shamefully, beginning with what he did in 2016.
All right, tonight, today we had the travel ban arguments. Guys, I'm going to play a quick soundbite. This is Justice Anthony Kennedy, many think a swing vote on the court with the travel ban oral argument. Let's listen.
Suppose you have a local mayor, and as a candidate, he makes vituperative, hateful statements. He's elected, and on day 2, he takes acts that are consistent with those hateful statements. That's whatever he said in the campaign is irrelevant.
Harmeet, he played both sides in the oral argument questioning. In that case, in that question, he seemed to indicate that he was siding with those who would strike down the travel ban. What's your take?
Well, I mean, Laura, I think they did play both sides, several of the judges, but most of the conservative judges seem to be siding with the administration on this. And so I think this case is up in the air. I would be foolish to make a prediction here. I think they thought about it very carefully. Ultimately, I think the Trump administration should win this, but obviously, you know, there are politics and there are very strong feelings. We heard some rhetoric about, you know, flipping the tables and what if a candidate made anti-Semitic remarks. One of the liberal judges said that. So I know they're thinking that way, but
Kagan,
you know, ultimately, if they look at the four corners of the law, I think that hopefully it should be
or the Constitution. Scott, prediction: will it be upheld or struck down?
I certainly hope it'll be struck down, but a tough case here. Trump's biggest problem and DOJ's biggest problem is they do have broad authority, but Trump's own statements, political and outside of the courtroom, he's his own worst witness. And the judges have to grapple with that. I don't think they can ignore his statements, whether they're inconsistent or not.
They can, depending on what their depending on what their jurisprudence is.
Matter, sure,
yeah, and what
but
their
as a
judicial
practical matter,
theory is.
they know what they know.
And
I think it's a real problem.
Well, for once, Scott is halfway right.
Yeah, we gotta go.
The problem isn't what he said before the election. It's what President has said and tweeted since the election. He's got to watch that.
Exactly.
We've talked about that before.
All right, guys, fantastic segment. I feel like I got extra, you know, did I get any continuing legal education credit with that segment? When we return, I'll reveal exclusive information tonight about how forces in America kept Mexican authorities from